Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University Belfast. This is Law Pod.
We're joined today with two local activists, Paul and Kaitlyn, and they've come in to talk to us about what is climate change and biodiversity laws. If you guys want to introduce yourselves and talk to us about the parties that you're engaged with.
I'm Kaitlyn. I'm part of the local Northern Irish Youth Strike, which is basically like a bunch of us kids organising through social media to do sort of like protest movements around the place.
I'm Paul Brogan. I have recently, last 6 months, been organising with Extinction Rebellion. My background, I have a PhD in electrical engineering and renewable energy integration, and also I also did physics at undergraduate and master level.
So what even is climate change?
Well, climate change is a massive issue. You see it on the news all the time, but it's basically like the destruction of our planet on like every level, in like nature and just like every single aspect of our living world, I guess. Like that's what it affects, and it's fundamentally caused by human action. That's the main point, I think.
Yeah. So a lot of climate change arises from the emissions of gases, which come from the way we live, I guess. I mean, most notable would be carbon dioxide and methane. Carbon dioxide coming from the combustion of fossil fuels primarily, but also you have biodiversity, the degradation of land, such as peatlands releasing CO2, but then you also have methane release from anthropogenic, that's human origins, from things like cows and so on, but also industrial processes, and then also from the melting of things like permafrost. And that would be the climate change side of things.
So you've talked about what it actually is. So why we see it on the media and the news all the time. So how has it affected our lives, and how is it going to affect our lives in the future?
That's the thing. I think it's quite almost selfish of us to think like, how is it going to affect me? It's already affecting millions of people over the world. Like you see, like whether that's just from like deforestation, rising temperatures in the Indian Himalayas, like areas like that. Like people are already being affected by this all over the world, and it's only now we're starting to see little bits of that come in. For instance, like the massive amount of floods that have been happening in England recently. But I think over time we're going to see it like directly like affecting us as like Western society like more and more, and that's when we're going to kind of click on and realise it's a problem.
Yeah, I think Kaitlyn touches on a very good point that the injustice of it all, that the people who are most responsible, typically in what we call the Western Hemisphere, are going to be some of the last to be affected. So one of the best places in the world to be is in the British Isles, because we have a big ocean beside us, keeping us cool, like relatively cool, and keeping us relatively wet. But yeah, I mean, you can attribute certain things in sub-Saharan Africa, like the migrant crisis 2015, 2016. There were a lot of causes, some of which were crop shortages and famines, and similarly in Syria as well, one of the worst civil wars we've seen in, like, even, it's gone on longer than the First World War at this stage, 9 years. And that was driven, in part, at least, by climate change. But as Kaitlyn mentions, the press here report the truth of being, we've had Storm Kira and then Storm Dennis, and places are still flooded, and we've still got quite extreme weather. We're seeing our weather patterns shift from, colder in, say, December and January to now getting colder in March and April. So we're seeing it now, but the real catastrophe will be in the future. There's a lag of about 30 years on the temperature rise. What we are seeing now is has been caused by emissions that were probably before you guys were even born, and whenever I was still in primary school, right? And we knew about it then. We were talking about the greenhouse effect back in the 80s and 90s, and we knew this was coming. And the warming we are experiencing now is due to that. So even if we stop, we have still got a lot of warming coming, which could be catastrophic if you believe the science.
I mean, it's clear that this has been a problem that's been plaguing our society for so long. And it seems like now we're only finally seeing headlines of what people are actually doing about it, which is one of the things that you guys are coming in to talk about. So we see these headlines about groups like Extinction Rebellion and Youth Strike all the time, which both of you are part of. So, Paul, who are Extinction Rebellion?
So Extinction Rebellion are, well, that's an interesting question, because we have this idea of a hierarchy in our head. I think, that's the way businesses are run. It's often the way families are run. We've got this thing that who's above who. So, and that's, if you ask who are Extinction Rebellion, you want to say like, oh, it's this figurehead, but it's not really like that. Each group is basically autonomous, but they sign up to the same code of ethics. And so they've got the 3 demands and 10 principles, and then the rebel agreement. And that's 3 demands are what we are demanding of the government principally, but potentially society. The 10 principles are how we engage with each other, and the rebel agreement is how we engage in direct action. And the reason we're engaging in direct action is up until now. So principle 1 is tell the truth. And we think that we've gone out to the scientists and said, tell us about climate change. And they've got back to us going, it's catastrophic. Principle 2 is act now. So take the Paris Agreement, 2015. We say to them, so we made certain commitments to keep temperatures below certain levels. And since then, all we've done is put out the study. So you had the IPCC 2018 report, you had the UN 2019 report. They all say we have to get our emissions down to net zero by between 2040 and 2055 globally, not just the UK. But we're not acting now. We're just like, oh, is there any other answers out there? It's like being told by one doctor, you've got cancer. And you go, oh, no, I don't like that doctor. Is there another doctor? Well, that's it. Oh, no, you definitely have cancer. Oh, no, you definitely have cancer. And it's like, you should stop smoking, but you just want to keep smoking, and it's easier to find a second opinion, even though they're all confirming. So that's why it's act now. And that's what Extinction Rebellion are doing. We've got very frustrated. There's a lot of people out there who have been engaged for 30 years on this topic. Nothing's happened. We've reached a precipice. And then that's why we feel it's justified to cause disruption. People who are white and middle class, as we're often denigrated as. We're not the typical type of people to get upset about these sorts of things or want to cause a fuss. But that's how we've ended up here.
Like you said, it's got such a wide membership, it's got such a wide media coverage, but sometimes it's kind of negative, I would say. And the methods that Extinction Rebellion are linked to using in order to achieve these 10 principles and get through the 3 demands are usually quite extreme, I would say. So what would you say about that, and why would you say that is an important part of the Extinction Rebellion kind of forcing their message through?
So Extinction Rebellion would look back to previous, as you say, forcing their message through. So things like the civil rights movements, and we can particularly, the American one is easier to look at. Civil rights in Ireland is a prickly subject, but one we would really like to, our special little country can have our own special discussions. But if you look at somewhere like, say, South Africa or North America, USA, then it's much clearer, as far as like the kind of good guys and bad guys go. But at the time, their methods were described in exactly the same way as Extinction Rebellions are being described. The likes of Gandhi in India, proposing non-violent direct action to overcome like an incredibly powerful foe. And we have to remember that there are a lot of people who just want business as usual. They're making a lot of money. They may or may not have accepted the science that in 50 or 100 years that are, we're going to have catastrophic collapse in terms of food production and so on. But yeah, that's why it's probably gone slightly off the topic. But yeah, that's why we feel it's justified to cause this. But I think the media will always do this. The media is negative. It is sensationalistic. It's not in depth. It doesn't wish to engage you in discussion about your ideas. It just wishes to, nitpick, find something which is wrong, and then just magnify that. Whatever causes sensation in people, that's what they want to put across. And I think that's why they pick certain events.
So you briefly touched on the idea of self-sacrifice of some of the members of Extinction Rebellion. So why is that important to the cause? Yeah,
so I think this is charge of being a hypocrite, or alternatively, as Jim Allister said, as a virtue signaller. These are sort of words which are often used in certain circles of the internet. But yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, you know, it was for so long, people would put on a little ribbon to say, I believe in this, I believe in that. You know, it's like the rainforest was a big issue back in the day. Back in, when I say the day, I mean in the 80s and 90s, destruction of the rainforest. It was easy to put a pin on, you know, and just say, oh, this is me. Think better of me. I'm believing in this. But if you're actually willing to get arrested, then that changes things. That if you're willing to go and be arrested for something you believe in, it's very difficult for someone to turn around and say, oh, you're just a virtue signaller.
So, I mean, in a way, the over-dramatised, sensationalist, extreme, in a way, media coverage is a good thing because it's showing that people are so committed and it is such an extreme cause that needs to be acted upon.
Yeah. And Extinction Rebellion are very clear about the reason for the arrests. For one, media report arrests, right? The British media will just ignore you, right, if they can. If you turn up and do a march, they'll go, oh, look, there was like 1 million people marching through London, right? I did that in the Iraq War. And like, yeah, it was on the front page for a day or two, and then it went away, all right? And nothing came of that. 1 million people, you know, travelled to London. I was lucky enough to be living in London. But to make this protest, they politely protested, they were politely ignored. But what the media do get excited about is this sensationalism, and we have to play within the game. We don't get to make the rules. We don't get to decide that this is a time of image and not a time of substance. Therefore, we have to use a time of image to try and bring some substance to the debate. It's really sad. I wish it wasn't like that. But it is a game we're in. Kind
of the idea of any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, so a really perfect example of that is the tube strikes. I mean, like, that was not really supported at all by Extinction Rebellion as a group. But those small groups, the affinity groups of like 12 people, chose to go and do those strikes. And I can't, in all good faith, say that they were a bad idea, because that's what got the media. And, you know, if you say Extinction Rebellion, you go like, no, I haven't heard of them. The guys who caused disruption in London, haven't heard of them. The guys that like glued themselves to the train, oh yeah, those guys. Right? So, I mean, yes, it's brand awareness and it's sort of playing into that crappy advertising stuff. But at the same time, you have to get your message out there. This is an important message. So
it is a very important message, but do you think that it could get to a point where it's too passionate and too emotive and the argument kind of gets lost in emotions and in extreme actions instead?
I think there is a very good mechanism within Extinction Rebellion for dealing with that. And that has to do with the regenerative culture side of things. And because these things need to be processed emotionally. And up to now, a lot of people feel alone. Like, a lot of people who have read, say, the IPCC report, they're, you know, in their rooms, they haven't got people to talk to, and actually having that circle where you can emotionally process these things means that you're probably less prone to act rashly. I mean, if you want to take an extreme example, you know, the people who go and shoot up their schools in America, typically loners, they've got a lot of emotions to process, but they haven't got anyone to talk to about. Or the people they talk to are very negative, like if they go onto the internet or something like that. I mean, 4chan or whatever is a dirty place. But I think within Extinction Rebellion, there's much better ways to process these emotions. And then there's also a very good theory of change, which is violence only really benefits the person with the biggest stick, right? The government have fighter jets, right? You know what I mean? They're only too willing to deploy given the half an excuse. So I think that's... and it's also part of the group mentality. When you get people together discussing sensibly, then extremes tend to get de-radicalized in a certain way.
I mean, there is this argument that I read about that it should be led by rationale instead, and it should be kind of science-driven. But everything you're saying is that it is, and it's reached this balance of finding an area to talk about emotions and talk about what's happening, but also you are backed by the science and backed by the rational aspect. So it seems that a balance has actually been reached. Would you agree with that?
Certainly. Look, motivation does not come from rationality. Like, I think, you know, we're brought up to think that we're rational creatures, but I think the more we see the internet unfold, the more we have to realize that, like, you know, the head follows the heart much more often than the heart follows the head. It's like, you know, you're not on a street in the cold driving rain or something like this, getting arrested by cops because, you know, of some sort of rational thing. It has to be an emotional basis. And I mean, you just have to look for that. And I always encourage people to look for a place that they love first, you know, and somewhere they wish to protect, and see what emotions that brings up. And that's your motivation to do things. But behind that is an understanding of the science around that.
I mean, it seems like a highly motivated and highly driven agenda, but is there ever going to be a danger of compromise? Like you said, the government is a huge party. Like, it's got the biggest stick, it's got these fighter jets, it's got more power. So you spoke really briefly about taking 2 steps back and when you take 1 step forward. So could you expand on that point a bit more, please?
I'd like to touch on the compromise thing. I went to see Kumi Naidoo, who was the, I don't know, Secretary General or something like that of the Amnesty International, and he made 2 good points. He was like, well, he made a lot of good points, but he made a good quote, and that was, the climate doesn't negotiate and the science doesn't change, right? The climate's not going to compromise with us. It's not going to go to us like, oh, okay, I understand you no SUVs, but you can drive minis, right? It's not going to come to that. So I'm sort of more concerned about the climate, which is, which is greater than any government. So yeah, I mean, we're not even looking for, like, what's the compromise? Actually, to be honest, I'm seeing this a lot. I work in electrical engineering, renewable energy integration, right? So the IPCC report said we need to be carbon neutral, like 0 carbon being emitted as a human population by 2055, right? That's ridiculous, but that's what is necessary. And so I see this compromise. So it's almost like the stages of grief, sort of denial and then negotiating, and that's where we're at. And, people like Ireland and the UK are saying we'll be carbon neutral by 2050. And it's like, and even the power system, that's all they're aiming for, 2050. This is going to slip to 2070. There's no ambition, there's no drive. And so we are at the point where they're trying to compromise with us, but they're not compromising with us. They're compromising with the environment, the climate. So,
last couple of questions. If there was any assumptions that listeners might have about Extinction Rebellion, could you break any of them down or talk about how they're false or how they're true?
Yeah, I'd make the point of, it's a little bit like the iceberg analogy, that what you see in television, like the people being arrested, is the tip of the iceberg. Behind every one person is arrested, there are 10 people, including things like, arrestee support, the well-being officers and so on, the discussions that were had before arriving there, the logistics to get there. So there are so many things that happen to get that one person who's willing to be arrested and has volunteered to be arrested there. And those rules are available to anybody who wishes to engage. You do not need to be arrested on any level to be part of Extinction Rebellion. Our first job is education, tell the truth, because the government aren't doing it, and the corporations are doing the opposite of it, right? They're consciously trying to advertise to us to consume more when we really need to be going in the opposite direction. And there's so many sort of well-being rules. It seems hard and masculine and kind of being dragged off the streets, but it's very, very soft and fluffy as well. And there are rules for everybody, right? This is a holacracy. You arrive with your skills and we find a role for you and you can engage in action. And engaging in action is one of the best ways to overcome the sort of malaise or sadness that we find in the earth at the minute.
So for people who are a bit apprehensive and the only thing they have to go off is you join Extinction Rebellion and you get arrested, it's simply not the case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now go along to some boring, simple XR event and then just meet some of the people and chat to them and then see what you think of them.
I think the idea that they find something tailored to you and you can input whatever you can is a really good message. But what other things do you want people to take away from listening to this episode?
Oh, yeah, well, I would say that so I'm going to quote Kumi Naidoo again. Personal change is a good place to start, but it's a bad place to finish, right? We need system change. By the time your goods reach you, 80% of the CO2, for instance, has been emitted. Most of the environmental damage has been done by the time the goods reach you. And we need to put pressure on those upstream corporations and so on. We need government intervention. So if you are, a vegan living off a small holding and you can convince yourself that you're not doing any damage, you're still going to get caught up in this sort of landslide of climate change. It's not enough. It's good, but we need to do more. And similarly, if you're a meat eater that flies every 2 weeks, it's still in your interests to get this done because it needs to happen.
I think that's a really good point about how people, when they do receive their products, they don't realise that the damage has been done. They can start recycling and start doing things, but for the majority, they have this product and it has gone through a lot of CO2 emissions, things like that. So the next time someone sees an Extinction Rebellion headline, whether it be sensationalist or a bit extreme in the media, what do you want them to take away from it?
Yeah, I suppose they can share it if they like. They should definitely scratch deeper. I think that was it for me personally. You know, I saw like the relatively extreme stuff, and it took me a while to actually scratch deeper. To kind of, because it is very superficial what's put across in the media, and yeah, just like literally just go into the IPCC 2018 executive summary. Go to I think it's page 6. There's a graph there. Take 10 minutes to look at it, and then read a couple of the bullet points before and after, and you know, realize that that's the motivation for people lying down there.
For anyone who doesn't know what the IPCC report is, or the COP report is, what are they?
So back in 2015, we had the Paris Agreement, where when like a bunch of politicians basically got together and they agreed to keep global temperature rise, but well below 2 degrees C, and aim for a target temperature of the world of 1.5 degrees C, rise above pre-industrial levels. The reason we rarely discuss why those figures were chosen, but it's because beyond that point, it is catastrophic. You know, but we're not told what the catastrophe is. We're just told this is the objective. So in 2015, this was agreed on by most of the world. And as they do, they turn around to the International Panel on Climate Change and say, can you go and tell us what we have to do to achieve this target which we have set ourselves? So 3 years later, during which time we have only exponentially increased our CO2 emissions, we, like this is like in those 3 years, probably as much CO2 emitted in maybe like 9 years in the 80s, right? Possibly all of the 70s. You know, that's the scale of what we're doing now. So they came back and said, okay, here's the results. You need to hit net zero by 2040 to actually respect the Paris Agreement, or like the very worst case scenario, net zero emissions of CO2 by 2055. That's what the IPCC report says. And then the UN emissions gap comes later. That was 2019. And it basically says the same thing, and possibly in stronger and more catastrophic terms. If you want to see, like, you know, if you think that Extinction Rebellion is talking about cataclysm, you just want to read these scientific reports, and they are conservative reports. Nothing gets in there without consensus. So the extremes of bad, which is actually what we're witnessing, are not in those reports.
I think, again, those reports will all be linked in the show notes for you to check them out.
Do you want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, anything?
I mean, even like the timeline.
I feel like I just like, I don't know, I don't have like the right words to be able to...
Absolutely fine.
Can you bring the personal touch? Because right, in 2015, like, how old were you?
Age numbers 13.
Right, so do you remember like the Paris Agreement and stuff? Or?
I remember hearing about it, like wee bits, but like I wasn't really told about it. We had like in primary school, we didn't have like geography or science. We had this thing called World Around Us, and I think I like asked in class about it. I was like, "You like, what's the crack with this?" And like, you don't really like nobody really know, and like none of my teachers would have known about it either. I think I went in like second year or something. I joined the environmental club, and that was the first time I kind of heard about it, and it was taken seriously. But apart from that, it's just like, I don't know, I didn't really know about it. It wasn't until I got more involved with the youth strike that I actually was like, oh, that's important, that thing with Paris. And I think there was obviously the news about Trump pulling America out of the Paris Agreement, and I was like, that's a bad thing, like, why? So it kind of stemmed from that sort of curiosity and following the media. But I know a lot of people don't necessarily do that or follow the media as much as like meticulously as I do. So like not everyone has the opportunity to even know about it, and that's a problem in itself.
I think that stresses how important these youth groups are, and like you were saying, even your school's environmental club is important, because you're not going to get 12-year-old or 13-year-olds looking up reports that they see on the news. You barely get them watching the news. So I think that just further stresses how important the youth target is.
I'd like to make clear that the sort of no blame, no shame, like policy is one of the principles of Extinction Rebellion. So if you don't know about this stuff, that's fine. To be honest, like I did like physics at undergraduate, and I did PhD in renewable energy integration, and I hadn't read these reports properly until recent months, whenever I was actually presenting them to groups. And it's one of the things that we do is this Heading for Extinction talk, which basically outlines the science of biodiversity loss and also climate change.
I think you don't even need to be a science expert to understand how important and how cataclysmic this whole thing is.
Yeah, there are summaries available online as well of individual reports. That'll be easier. That's what a lot of us in the Youth Strike take reference from, because they do have sort of condensed versions if you don't want to get into like the real heavy scientific terminology that you don't get. Like there are simplified versions.
And we'll have some links to those in the show notes too, if you don't want to be dredging through long reports.
600 pages is a lot. 40 pages is plenty.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to Kaitlyn, who's coming in to talk about Youth Strike and her part in that. So we've just heard so much about Extinction Rebellion, Kaitlyn, and are there any parallels in theory, in method, in any part of Youth Strike that can be drawn against Extinction Rebellion?
Well, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of parallels, even just in the reason that the organisation exists. We are actively trying to raise awareness around the climate catastrophe and like trying to promote pressure on the government, as well as to try and like get people just aware and educated about like what's happening and what climate change is. I guess Extinction Rebellion also would do like protests and stuff, and we'd be quite a protest based group. And XR do actually help out the youth strikes. They like offer like first aid. There's a regen table, which is like coffee and tea and biscuits if anyone wants to take a wee sit down. And just like things like that, materials like XR are very, very useful and like a really fundamental part of the local youth strikes in Belfast.
So if anyone's listening and thinking, oh, it's just another activist group, what are the main differences between Youth Strike and Extinction Rebellion?
Well, Youth Strike is definitely more, as you can probably tell by the name, orientated towards the youth of like our local like community. I would say the difference is we don't do as many sort of radical actions because a lot of us are like under 18 as well, like the majority of us are. So like that sort of like risk of like getting arrested or whatever if you want to do that. It's just not as easy a thing to kind of go with, I guess. Like, I don't know, like we all have parents who are shouting at us and don't like us going in and missing school anyway. So there is that sort of like different level, like you feel like you have to be a little bit more protected in some way because you're still technically a child. I would say, I'm not sure, like we don't have as many sort of like work groups and things like that. Like I know XR have a lot of like artwork groups and a lot of meetings and things. A lot of the youth strike is based online. That's the majority of like where we like interact with each other. We have Zoom call meetings, lots of Instagram and WhatsApp group chats, and it would actually probably be only just once a month when the local groups all come together for the strikes. But apart from that, we don't really see each other as much. But of course, then we have that advantage of being in school, so you see your local peers that would be going to your strikes there. But it is a different setup, and it does take a different sort of strategy to kind of make it work.
I mean, you briefly touched on this when you were talking about the parallels of Extinction Rebellion, but if you could just summarise, what is Youth Strike then? What are their policies? What do they stand for?
We have a bunch of demands actually that are sort of like the basis of what we do. So the first one is Save the Future. So that's basically putting pressure on the government to declare a climate emergency, which thankfully they have done locally in Stormont just a few weeks ago, and to implement a Green New Deal to achieve climate justice. So that is probably the sticking point for our local government as well. They're kind of not entirely like too convinced of it. Like a lot of MLPs were quite skeptical of this sort of like Greta culture, quite like, I don't know, patronising. So we're trying our best. But and demand 2 is Teach the Future. So that's that would be another summer thing from XR, where we're trying to educate people about like what we need to do to try and fix this problem, and to like just make other young people aware of the urgency of this issue. We have Tell the Future, so demanding that the government sort of communicates the severity of the ecological crisis, like to tell people the danger we're in and to sort of, I don't know, just make people more aware and not sort of brush it off and just see it as that thing on the news that's happening halfway across the world. And then the fourth demand is to empower the future, so that's making sure that young people are included in policy making, just making sure no one is excluded from participating in our democracy, especially because it's going to be the young people who face the sort of the consequences of the government like destroying our natural environment and completely just taking advantage of it.
If we could just go back to the point you made earlier about the Greta. Greta Thunberg?
Greta
I think
Thunberg,
just like Extinction Rebellion, her name is thrown over all over social media, over the news, headlines. Why do you think that's important, and why do you think that's looked down upon, like you said?
I would say, like, I know from doing a lot of research into Greta, she didn't necessarily want to be the sort of poster girl for the youth strike or for just like the movement as a whole. But the media love to have a poster figure. I even find that we have like a couple of youth representatives, the Belfast Live and stuff like that, they will cling on to, and they're like, oh, well, this person's at every strike, so we're going to put her face here and her face here. Like, the media really like to have a sort of like centerpiece person to look to and kind of, almost like make connected like a brand or something. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, she is just like a kid, and a lot of the negative feedback she gets are from people who are skeptical of her message. And that in itself, like, you see politicians on Twitter and everything, whether that's from like Vladimir Putin to Trump, bullying Greta. I think the way she deals with it is fantastic. Like, you see, like, Trump described Greta as a child with anger management issues that needs to go to cinema and chill with a friend.
She changed her Twitter biography to that.
Oh, it was so funny.
I think it says a lot that as you said, the poster girl is a girl for Youth Strike. So I think one of the main points that I do want to touch on is that this emphasis on the youth, like you were saying, you're connected through social media, you only meet once a month. Why do you think it's important? Because like Paul touched on earlier, climate change is something that's been going on for years and years. Yeah. So why do you think it's important that the youth take a lead on tackling it?
I would say, like, obviously it's going to affect us most, but it's not even that like we should take on that role, it's that we are having to take on that role, because you still have that significant amount, isn't it, like 40% of the people in the UK who are adults don't really see climate change as an issue. They kind of just dismiss it, and a lot of those people, a lot of that demographic are middle-aged people. So the youth are actually having to harness that information and being like, look, this is an emergency, this is a really big deal. So it's not even that we should, it's that we are being forced to, just because of our own moral standards. We don't want to be stuck in like the mess that the past generations have created for us.
In doing so, do you think the fact that it is so youth-based, and also briefly touching on what Paul said about how the media is sensationalising this, do you think that the youth, alongside social media, which gives lots of different streams of opinions and things, can kind of see past that one track line of climate change isn't real, or we don't need to act that fast, or, you know, it's not as important as these kids are saying? Do you think younger generations can see past that and talk more about how it is? Oh
yeah, I definitely say with this, the accessibility to information through social media. So you have, as Paul was saying, the IPCC report, you have the UN report, we have access to review the Green New Deal and stuff like that. So youth are actually being given an opportunity, or a better opportunity, to be able to like understand the world around them, and to be able to show people, whether that's on Twitter or on Instagram, here we actually have the facts and we know what we're talking about. So you can't really argue with that, and if you do, then it is literally just like, you know, you can have your own opinion but you can't have your own facts.
I think that's a huge benefit of social media. You know, like you're saying, you're sitting here and you can reach someone thousands of miles away and talk about what you both can do to help the environment. And that's one of the great things, that it is targeted towards the younger generations who are so adapted to this social media. But do you think there are any downfalls of targeting it towards a youth and a younger generation?
Well, yeah, I would definitely say there are a couple of things that like aren't the greatest. Like, I mean, I'm definitely not a believer that anyone should not know about their circumstances, but I can see from just looking at our local youth strike, there are a lot of very young kids there, or like people like just coming into secondary school, and you can see they are very, very upset and very scared about the climate crisis. And it's just like, I don't know, it can be quite upsetting seeing this sort of information when you're not maybe like ready for it, and you're just like scrolling Instagram, and then Like you have access to that information, which tells you, oh, right, well, potentially my future is doomed. Like, what am I doing? Like, I've talked to a lot of people in the youth strike who would feel very depressed about that and would be very like, well, you know, I'm only here today, so I feel like I have a purpose. Like, what's the point if, like, in, like, 30 years, we're going to be past the, like, kind of comeback point and we're all going to be doomed? Like, it can have a really, really negative effect on young people's mental health. But at the same time, I feel like it's really important that we harness that knowledge and use that sort of passion and that anger to make us want to take action, because that's the only way that anything's going to get done.
Would it be right in saying another one of the downfalls of targeting it towards a younger generation is it somehow loses its respectability in a way?
Oh, definitely. Definitely a lot. Like, young people are patronised. That's just, it seems to be part of culture. Like, oh, right, well, if you're a younger person, then you obviously don't have as much life experience and you're not gonna know as much about this stuff. But that it just really irritates me, because, like, you see that, but, like, at the same time, we do know what we're talking about. We have been told, we have educated ourselves because we are passionate. And like I don't know, do grown-ups get a kick out of that? Like, completely dismissing children's opinions? Like, especially, like, you see that again with Greta. Like, she's completely, like, not taken seriously by a lot of people because she's a teenager. And it's disgraceful. It's shameful. And that's why it's so important that we have organisations like XR, who are filled with adults who actually respect us, and they're here to support us, but they're not going to try and talk over us at the same time. Like, they're going to listen to us and accommodate what we're trying to get across.
As a young person yourself and someone involved in youth strike, how do you think that the local government, council, politicians are handling climate change?
Oh boy, terribly. Like, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks now that Stormont declared a climate emergency. There was actually a couple of members of the youth strike who were present during that meeting when that was talked about, and apparently it was just a very, very quick, maybe like 10 minutes of them discussing it, a couple of people complaining about it, and then them just being like, right, cool. Like, that is just not on. That is not okay. And you can read articles about it, and there's a couple of MLPs who are talking about this sort of Greta this, Greta that bandwagon culture. Like, this shouldn't be taken seriously. This is just those darn kids. Like, you're just like, it's baffling that we still have members of parliament that have been elected to be there that just don't take it seriously and don't even want to think about it. And there was a fantastic quote. I think it was actually by the environmental minister, and he was like, oh no, Northern Ireland has a very individual situation because we rely on our agriculture industry. And it's like, guys, like, there's not going to be an agriculture industry if you keep abusing, like, the natural resources and our landscape. So no, I don't think they have a grasp in it. I know a few members of the Green Party. Obviously, they know what the crack is, but they don't necessarily have the power to be able to put in the legislation that's needed. So honestly, no, I think our local government, in terms of, like, climate legislation, it's laughing stock, to be honest. And it's not going to even be another 2 or 3 years until a lot of that sort of Green New Deal stuff is even put into place, which is, again, absolutely disgraceful. Yeah.
So to someone listening who's just heard that and is then thinking, well, then what's the point? You know, if the men in charge aren't going to take action and change their ways, what's the point of groups like Extinction Rebellion and Youth Strike having a message if it's like talking to a brick wall?
Because you can see from even looking at some of, like, XR's recent movements, such as in Bristol, there was plans for a new runway to be built. XR actually protested, and that has been overturned. They've changed that decision. So even if it's just like small little bits like that, we are having an effect. We are being listened to, and you do see us on the news. So it is actually having somewhat of an effect. I think every striker and every part of the rebellion is quite, like, has a bit of that doubt in their mind. They're like, what if this comes to absolutely nothing? But as a human, you have, like, a moral right, I think, to be able to act on when you see something is wrong, when you see something is out of place. If you just stand by, then, like, I don't know, it would drive me mental, personally, you know?
If you could get a listener to take away something from this episode about Youth Strike, about Extinction Rebellion, about being someone in a younger generation who is going up against these big powers, what would your message be to them?
I would say just do what you think is right, because like if you know that the position that you hold is correct and you have the evidence to back that up, it doesn't matter if anybody tries to argue with you. Like, you know you're in the correct position. And I would also say try and reach out to people with similar mindsets to yourself, because that helps so much. That sort of eco-anxiety that you have the potential of feeling, when you're surrounded by people who all understand that same like emotion, it helps so much. Like, I think as humans, we need a sort of community environment to be able to thrive and like reach our like best potential. But with things like social media, it's kind of encouraged quite an individualized lifestyle culture where you're kind of in your own little bubble and so on. So reaching out and trying to get involved in these sort of things, it does help not only your mental health, but just like your well-being and being able to be like, yeah, no, I actually have done something for my future and for my children's future.
Do you think on the flip side of that social media point, it could also not be individualistic, and it could also allow people to reach out to other people and to join forums and to join
Definitely.
groups? So it's not like what Paul was saying with Extinction Rebellion, you know, someone sitting in Belfast can't really relate to someone jumping on a tube in London, and social media allows wider access to that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, it's all about how you use the tool. Like, you can use a chainsaw to, like, hurt someone, or you can use a chainsaw to cut down a tree. Like, social media is a flexible tool that, if used the right way, can have a really, really positive influence. So if you use that as a means to reach out and stay connected to people, that is obviously going to be a positive thing. And just knowing how to go about using that in a good way, and also just being aware that there are people out there who don't like what you're saying and aren't going to accept it no matter what. Being aware of that and like kind of arming yourself and like having people who support you in your movement and just around you, that is really, really important.
So that support should, in theory, come from a community around you and the local community around you. So do you think the local community around Belfast is doing enough?
I think the local community in Belfast and Northern Ireland don't really get it, or they don't, like, a lot of people don't even really know what the IPCC report or COP26 is. You know, they don't really get it. They've heard it very fleetingly on the news, but they don't really know what it is. So it's not necessarily that they're like bad people. It's just they don't know about it. They haven't really been affected by it, so it's not necessarily on like their top list of concerns. But I think with the growing awareness around it, with like media and news and everything, it is sort of XRs and youth strikes like us, like kind of very small organisations who are trying to get the message out. I feel like it's almost our responsibility to offer that education to people and to share that and to use the tools and equipment that we have to just try and spread this knowledge, because people in Northern Ireland aren't dumb. I think if given the right education and the right access to the right information, which is also filtered by schools and so on, and our education system, giving people access to that correct information is a really, really crucial part to make sure that we actually can do the maximum that we can as a community.
Talking more about the community aspect, Paul, you do know that the community does take some action and has taken initiative in reaching out and doing things. If you could briefly talk about the anti-gold mining campaign, problems on the A6, things like that.
So you touched on sort of how much traction, Extinction Rebellion particularly and youth strikers and so on are getting in Belfast or in Northern Ireland. The interesting thing with Northern Ireland is a very diverse ecosystem. Like politically, we have like 5 major parties plus the normal ones, right? So like, whereas in other countries it's usually 2, maybe 3. So, and it's similar with that in activist groups that, there's stuff happening with, there's a lot of social justice problems in Belfast, and it's not like Belfast is in any way shy of direct action, looking back through its history. So, but we have to then try and convince people that this is a cause which is important. But Extinction Rebellion's philosophy is it's a movement of movements. So bringing in people from the likes of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and so on. But the people we're also reaching out to, for instance, is No to Cloughan Point. So they want to build a pier. It's really quite long, so you can bring in super tankers. There'll be one truck coming into Belfast every 4 minutes from there, one oil tanker. Lorry coming into Belfast every 4 minutes. So 2 minutes, one tanker every 2 minutes driving out and back to Whitehead, right? And this is a time we're investing in fossil fuel infrastructure at a time whenever we need to stop using fossil fuels in the next 10 years. That's what it said.
Just like Kaitlyn said, the local government is not doing anything.
Exactly. They're making noises, but they're not acting now, which is a second demand. So that is an issue, right? If you live on that road, there's every reason for you, for your own self-protection, to not want one of these trucks driving past, spewing out diesel every single day into your face. But then you can step back and go, this is part of a wider problem and for the society we live in and something. Anyway, so that's one group which kind of shows the macroscopic and the microscopic issues at hand. Similarly, the gold mining in Tyrone, it's actually my home county, whereby it's very much that short-termism, extract the gold, a few people make money, some people on the ground driving trucks and walking around on a mucky site make some money, and then you're left with a contamination problem for a couple of centuries, as is seen in America and so on. Also have the pig factories. So Stop Newton Abbey Pig Factory. They're talking about millions of pigs being bred in Northern Ireland for export to the Chinese market. We are left with a lot of pig excrement, and then which has to be processed. And that's like a point. And we can't even process our human waste properly, and we're going to be having the equivalent of something like 5 or 10 times our population of humans in pig shit coming out every year. So that's an issue as well. So these sort of local people have their local issues, and we're trying to network them because we have a common agenda. One way of stifling this type of activism is to kind of zone people off into their little bits and then just let them sort of suffocate. And XR, one of our strategies, is to really try and join together, bring a new lease of life, and then also just share skills. Extinction Rebellion is little more than a set of suggestions for how to organise, and that's the most important thing, organising.
So final discussion note for both Kaitlyn and Paul is that some progress has been made, but not enough. What would you say needs to be done moving forward? I know, Paul, you already touched on this, but what needs to happen right now?
So the official Extinction Rebellion line is that we are a pressure group, not a solutions group. And the best place to look for solutions is in the UN Emissions Gap Report 2019. It has very specific things to do. So as an example, it says that all European countries should adopt the public transport or mass transit systems that are employed in Europe, in the best countries in Europe. So, for instance, in Germany and in the Netherlands. So there's a simple policy thing, like take cars out of Belfast, make, okay, if you're disabled, right? Now all of a sudden congestion's gone. Yeah, ambitious public transport infrastructure that people are not forced to rely on their car. If you have to use your car, you have been forced into that position. And so there's one, but there are, also space heating in houses. We need to have a deep retrofit of our houses so that we don't waste so much energy heating our houses, which saves us money, which reduces air pollution, and also helps to address one of the major emitters of CO2.
I think what needs to be done now is, so definitely, I would say, like, our organisations are pressure groups, but building awareness on how to actually apply that pressure. For instance, the upcoming COP26 meeting is, so you have global leaders and business owners are meeting in Glasgow to discuss Paris Agreement legislation and stuff. And basically they've all messed up. They don't, a lot of them have, I think it's most of them haven't even nearly hit any of their targets. Letting people know that and letting people be angry about that, so that pressure can be applied. I think if you can do anything about it, be angry. Actually just work from that place of passion and rage, because from that emotion, then actions will emerge. Like you will do something about it. But just having and being okay with sitting with that just anger, I think that's the most important first step that you can take.
I think that they're both really great messages. But the final thing is, if someone's sitting listening to this and thinking the very common thought of, oh, I'm just one person, what can I really do? What would you have to say to that?
No, it doesn't really work like that, because then if you have like 20 people sitting there thinking the same thing, like if you can engage people, and if you and yourself can like just if you want to channel that feeling into doing something that will not only help your own well-being but potentially help the planet's well-being and our children's well-being, then you might as well just get up and do it. Like it's not difficult. It just takes inspiration and passion. And if you're sitting there thinking that in the first place, then I think you probably already have that. So come on down. We have cake sometimes.
I'm going to turn a phrase from Jordan Peterson. Some certain people will know. So consider the ant, right? I mean, yes, we are like a tiny ant in comparison to, the global sphere, right? And a single ant on its own is dead, right? If it's out walking around. Ants are a social creature, but humans are far more a social creature. And the interesting things that humans do emerges from organising. But to be honest, the society we live in wants to atomise us. They want to keep you in a room and watching a television and ordering food to your house and so on, and we're sort of told that that's what'll make us happy, but that's not the way humans have evolved. That's not right. We are a social animal, so go outside, face your anxieties, take yourself outside your comfort zone, and then you realise that you will achieve far more by organising with other people, both through your combined intellect but also through your combined effort, that you'll achieve things that are like magical, things you can realise that you would never have come up with or been able to achieve on your own, but you all have shared ownership, so you all own it just as much. But you, it's sort of weird. It's not a zero-sum game. Everyone owns the outcome equally, but we have a shared input. So yeah, I think that's it. Organise is one of the most important things. And to be honest, if we can't fix climate change and we are into catastrophic collapse, the most important thing we can do is organise locally, because it's when a collapse happens in a society, it's the big structures that fall first, international shipping and distribution of food and stuff.
Absolutely. I think it's clear that you're both very passionate about this and very, very knowledgeable. So thank you so much for coming in to talk about such a great message and a great cause.
Thank you, Anoushka.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Law Pod. You've been listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by the law students and staff at Queen's University Belfast. This episode was produced by Richard Somerville. Our theme music is by Colonel Chocolate and the Justice Triangle. Law Pod is funded by the Queen's University Law School. Please follow us on Twitter at QUB LawPod, and you can learn more about us at lawpod.org. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. This was Law Pod.